Welcome to the Intuitive Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Rafferty, a medical doctor, PhD, Reiki and shamanic intuitive healer. I'm here to bring you on a journey of holistic healing that explores the science of the physical body combined with mental and emotional well-being, energetic and spiritual health. And I am so excited to welcome Sinead from Intuitive Eating Ireland today. Oh, Sinead, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be having this conversation with you.
Well, I just love anything to do with intuition.
Yes, me too. Me too. Which is why I reached out to you. I'm not sure if I had said it to you that actually somebody in our group had sent me a link to your podcast. I hadn't heard about it before. So once I saw the name like intuitive health or whatever, I was like, I have to see what this guy is about. Let me chat to
Yes.
him.
Well, I'm so delighted you reached out because um, it's so wild, isn't it? I love that thing spread. And it's been so crazy because for so long on my journey, even in the one-to-one sessions, it just seems to have reached a point now where the word has got out and everything's just gone like wildfire. And it's so beautiful to get to this point where people are listening to the podcast, people are kind of messaging with the most beautiful the most beautiful messages. It just fills my heart with so much joy. And when I get back in touch with the guests to share some of the things that people have really taken away from what we discuss, it just makes everything feel so worthwhile. And it's just so powerful. And just the tools that people can take away. And we were chatting a little bit about this before actually we even started recording with regard to just the vulnerability of people on the journey, and for people to actually hear they're not alone in this. They're not alone in all of these things that are kind of whirring around in their head that maybe they just haven't had the opportunity to talk to someone about, you know?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I feel really passionate about, I suppose, one area in particular because it was something that impacted me was binge eating.
Mm.
And I suppose when we talk about when we have the conversations about health and nutrition and fitness, and I'm all for these conversations. I'm very interested in health, particularly mental health. That's the field that I work in, but obviously, of course, physical health. But for so long, and even for myself, our relationship to movement, to our bodies, to food, to health, and what that even means, sometimes is often left out of that conversation, right? And I didn't realize for so long that my relationship with food was not healthy. Like I was studying nutrition, I was fully immersed in it in my 20s and early 30s. I knew all the quote unquote right things to be doing from a nutritional perspective. And yet I was experiencing this binge eating, and it wasn't good for me. And yet, like, there was such shame around that, and it was something that I just kind of wanted to, push to the side, and thinking like, oh, I'll eventually just figure this out and it'll just magically just stop and disappear. But so many people have so much shame around their eating behaviors, the overeating, the binge eating, the secret eating, hiding food, maybe bringing a certain food. Like I remember I used to bring like, all my salads, and everybody in work would be like, oh, she's the health one, she's the healthy one. And they would see me having all of these delicious foods. But actually then behind all of that, I was kind of wheeling in to the shop on the way out the road from work because and gorging on things like chocolate bars and all these things that I was like had such rigid rules around and such judgment around, and I felt really restricted by not ever allowing them. There was no freedom to allow that piece of chocolate. So this is what happened then. There was that biological drive to like get it into me. So I'm really passionate about talking about binge eating and what that experience can be like, because I need people to know they're not alone and that there's not something wrong with them. You're not broken if you binge eat. There's a reason that that is happening. So I'm really, yeah, these conversations are amazing. So thank you.
I love it. I love it. And of course, because like you talk about, because I do so much work in the holistic intuitive space, when people come through, obviously it's about optimizing the physical body, and then looking at the mental and emotional piece, which is often left out of the discussions when you're going and sitting in a GP setting or you're in a clinical environment. And even trying to kind of identify how you can find people to help you on the journey, and to have the type of experience that you have on the path yourself with it. Like I know I went through a huge fitness journey. I love to stay fit now, and even uh, it, sometimes I do have a tendency to fall back into the space of, uh, kind of looking at what my relationship to food looks like in regard to my body. Because back when I was mad into bodybuilding, like my body on the outside looked great, but on the inside, that was not great. I was not eating for health. I was eating for my physical appearance. And I'd love to hear more kind of about the journey of kind of how, the way we're perceived by the world, our impression of how we're perceived by the world and how that impacts our food choices rather than actually doing it from a healthy relationship to food and to our emotional space, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, I think there's so much pressure, isn't there, on how our body physically looks. The messaging is constant, like in the world that we live in. It's all about, be as thin as possible. The first thing you'll be told if you go to the GP, maybe your cholesterol, your blood pressure. You might not even get asked about what your diet is like, how much you move, how stressed you might be, what your sleep is like. The first thing that might be mentioned is hop on the scale. We'll see what your BMI is, and we'll tell you that you need to go and lose weight. And that constant kind of weight centric model, well, we've got to be asking ourselves, where is this bringing us? Is this improving the population health? Is this improving our individual health? Absolutely not. In fact, I would argue it's probably bringing us maybe further away. We need to separate weight and health. We need to understand that, of course, our weight can impact our health. Absolutely, but it does not equal our health. And if we begin to shift that focus, what so many people find, and this is the work that I do all the time with people, is that we can absolutely shift our focus towards health promoting behaviors instead of the constant focus on what the number is on the scale, um, counting specific calories, being obsessed with the what foods you're allowed or not allowed. It's more about the feeling. How do I feel with these foods? How do these what do these foods give me energy? Do they help with my mental clarity? How do they impact my mood? How does movement impact me? From an internal perspective, not an external. And again, I'm not here to shame anybody who wants to change their physical appearance or anybody that wants to be, doing the bodybuilding, etc. Like there's no judgment there. But as you mentioned, and we hear all the time, don't we, is that people that have been in that field of kind of, very focused on the aesthetic and the outer experience, but actually so many will admit that actually when they were there, they didn't feel great internally. There was like often a lot of low mood and low libido, and we're constantly hyper vigilant and like, constantly thinking about what they had to do that day in terms of the exercise that they had to get in. And it was also, it feels very like squeezed, nearly like stressed all the time. And I think that, again, you're so right. In terms of the mental piece that like we don't consider is that you can be eating all the broccoli, you name it, that can be on your plate all of the time. But if internally there's a constant state of stress, if your nervous system is constantly activated in this, hyper vigilant sympathetic nervous system state, well, what's going to be happening with that food? Are we really getting the benefits of that food? No. So I really feel that we need to be starting with having a peaceful relationship with food, that we come away from all of, and again, this is another reason I love having the conversation is, why do people even know what a normal relationship with food looks like?
Yes. And I absolutely love this. And especially, because I do a lot of work with our kind of ancestral lineage, the work with the land and what our culture and society has taught us, we come from a land that has been associated with famine and this kind of scarcity energy. And even as you go through, then we kind of entered into the kind of this very meat and two veg approach to eating as well. So in our cultural history, we probably didn't necessarily know exactly what kind of a healthy relationship to food necessarily looked like, or we hold some of the memory of that through our intergenerational programming. So, could you speak into a little bit about kind of maybe what your journey with what binge eating was like? I'd love to know kind of how that presented for you, and maybe some of the listeners listening today can actually relate to kind of how you became aware of that process and what the journey was like for you to actually get to a space of well, what does healthy eating look like, you know?
In terms of my own experience of binge eating, my binge eating started very early on in my teenage years. Once I started going to Weight Watchers, so I, whatever reason, I was the eldest of four girls. It's not necessarily something that we would have heard at home, but because of my peer group and what I was seeing maybe in the magazines, there was no social media. I'm 40, but there was no social media really in the 90s. But I would have obviously picked up the message somewhere that I needed to lose weight, because I decided to take it upon myself when I was 16 to join Weight Watchers. And we went in, myself and my sisters, and we would weigh in and basically get this plan. And we were counting points to beat the band. And very early on, after a number of months, I began to find myself at the weekends, before you would head into kind of the real rigid week on the Monday, and the weigh-in was on the Thursday and the whole lot. I would find at the weekend that I was so out of control. I couldn't stop eating. And it didn't make sense to me, because I never had this before. I certainly didn't put it down to the fact that I was physically restricting, mentally restricting. So I was kind of judging all the food that I was eating. And all of a sudden, it was just this out of control binge eating. And I was mortified. I didn't know why this was happening. My mother would buy certain foods in the shopping, and like I would have it inhaled in a matter of hours. And so I suppose what happened was I continued this cycle for years. I would join diet after diet, the Weight Watchers, the Slimming World. I done keto, I done intermittent fasting, there was always something I was trying, whatever next diet it was. Because what would happen inevitably is I would lose weight, of course, on the diet, but then the binge eating would start, and it would the weight would plateau, because of course the binge eating. So I would need to find the next thing, thinking it was just that I wasn't on the right diet, not understanding that what was driving my binge eating was the fact that I was choosing to diet in the first place. So this happened like right throughout my 20s, and I had a child quite young. I was pregnant at 19, so I had my first son quite young, and then I had my second son when I was 28. And when I had Evan, that's my second boy, I started studying nutrition. And learning about nutrition was wonderful. It opened up lots of doors, but it also brought me to another space, which we might call orthorexia. For anybody that hasn't heard about orthorexia, it's really an obsession with quote unquote clean eating, perfect eating, organic eating, being quite fearful of any processed foods. So I kind of fell into that trap when I studied nutrition. So then I began to kind of have the same fears around my children's eating and their food choices. So I started to bring in all of this gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, basically stripped any fun or joy from food that you possibly could. I brought that into the household. And very early on, I saw my own son. At the time, he was maybe 3 or 4. I saw him, there was an emergence of these behaviors that I was like, oh my God, he's mirroring to me the way that I eat. He was secret eating. He was hiding food. He was going to his grandparents' house, and he was, stealing food. He was the child that went to the parties, and he would spend all his time at the table where all the food was. He wouldn't even go and play with other kids, because he was like, oh my God, all my Christmases have come at once. I'm going to eat all of this food right now, because she ain't going to give me any of this food for the next how long at home. So it was massive novelty for him to have these foods. So he was essentially binge eating at a very young age.
Thank you so much. Obviously, it's so vulnerable to share your own journey with some of these things, and I really am so grateful for that. And I suppose just to touch on a few things, I think particularly mums that I see coming through the door, and I get contacted by a lot of women that are like, do you see kids? Like, will you see my teenager? And sometimes, or generally, the approach that I take is, well, actually, I'd love to see you first, to kind of explore what's happening. And I love how you've said there, it's not about pointing the finger here. It's not about kind of taking on the weight of blame that all of the goodness and the love that you put in was the wrong thing, you know? And I I love that we touched on kind of this intergenerational or inherited relationship to food, because you can be absolutely sure that the belief structures, they came from further back down the line a lot of the time, And I say this, and obviously I see a lot of men through the practice as well that kind of come to me about things going on at home with their kids too. But I tend to see the predominant um, kind of discussions I have tend to be with women about their children. And obviously, because I work with womb healing and I do a lot of work with women on the journey, I just it's just about really supporting people and reassuring them that actually the work that you do internally, it means that the younger generations don't have to carry that anymore. So rather than vilifying yourself for what's happened to date, now that you're starting to have the realizations, it's actually about honoring yourself and saying, actually, I'm stepping forward to relieve my children from carrying this stuff for the future. And I always say to these beautiful women that come in, you know, this is probably the greatest gift that you can actually give your children, you know? And I think we think gifts need to be kind of beautiful presents you give at Christmas and all these things. And I'm like, no, energetic gifts, emotional gifts, they are the greatest gifts. And if you can relieve the energetic burden and call forward what's in your shadow element, because kids are a lovely and probably the most powerful mirror we will ever have in a lot of ways, you know, because it's almost like they'll do the dance with you based on what's in your psyche or subconscious. I tend to find a lot of the time in these sessions, and it's almost like, well, what's going on? How can we hold each other in the dance, and how can we help each other heal, and how can I throw out the suitcase that was handed down to me of all the shite? How can I go through the suitcase, find what's not needed, and feck it out, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually when I had my daughter. So I've three boys and a girl. And when I had my daughter, she's going to be 8 actually in November. When I had her, that was also actually, as you mentioned, like a drive. There was something about having a girl, because obviously I'm female, and I was something about having a girl that I was like, oh, even nearly more so than the boys for whatever reason. I don't know. But there was something about having a daughter that I was like, oh, I've got to release this crap. I can't project any of it onto her. I don't want to pass it on to her. And it's not about like getting it perfect, right? Because I think that can be an added stressor, that we're like, oh, now I have to model a perfect relationship with food. And body, but it's about, okay, but where can I, what's my starting point here? What can I release? What can I let go of? What can I ensure that I maybe do differently for her, that she can maybe navigate this maybe a bit easier than I did?
Yes, absolutely. I just absolutely love that. And I feel children are such a beautiful gift that come into the world, and on a soul or a spiritual level, it's almost like we're presented with these gorgeous little souls that are blank slates in loads of ways, even though they have their soul memory from their past
Yes.
lives. But I tend to say to people, it's we have these soul agreements with these little souls, like those little baby souls, they choose the families that they come in to learn all the lessons with. So the learnings that we go on as a little tribe together of souls learning, it's almost like that is part of the growth and the development that that little soul wanted when they came into the world. And
Yeah.
you know, we do our best every day, and sometimes we just don't realize that actually some of the things that we're kind of projecting out into the world, they're our own wounds in the shadows that we didn't even know were there.
Yeah.
So I love what you were saying there with regard to approaching yourself with a bit of softness,
Yes.
especially with topics like this. Obviously, because I do a lot of work around nutrition and good health, just to support people with regard to actually what does that look like to kind of to eat in a way that you're choosing foods that love you back.
Yeah.
And eating kind of what your gut is telling you to do. And this is the thing kind of with the course we just launched. There's a whole section in it with regard to, are you in touch with your intuition?
Yes.
Are you in touch with your gut feeling about some of this stuff? Because as we go on a journey through life, I loved what you were saying there about kind of the external forces telling you what to do. So we may have had a feeling arise in us, and then the external force says, no, that's not right. This is right. but your gut was telling you something. So essentially, as you journey through life, you're just learning to ignore your gut feeling, and then you reach a point where you're like so disconnected from your intuition, from that gut feeling. We don't really know how to approach things like food or alcohol or relationships or sex or
Yeah.
any of these things. And because they're associated with a dopamine reward, a pleasure response, we are detached from the intuitive element of it, and we just reach for the dopamine.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Does that
Oh,
make
makes
sense?
complete
Yeah.
sense because I think sometimes people might misunderstand what maybe so that in case the listeners in any way might just want to clarify this point that like I love nutrition information. I think nutrition
Mm.
information is really important. I feel people deserve to understand and be educated on nutrition, right? And I suppose, but I guess that I could now, let's say, for example, I'm in a different place now where when I consider nutrition, because I've done the work, because I know I get to choose, I know I can check in about what feels good for me, then yes, I can have boundaries around nutrition. There's times where it's not like this free for all and just, eat all the donuts just because you had thoughts about eating the donuts. Not at all. There can be boundaries, there can be pauses where you might check in. You might be considering nutrition more at certain points than others. Maybe, you might be when you're training or when you're not, whatever it might be. So nutrition education information is really key. But people need to understand before you maybe get too kind of focused on that, first ask yourself, what is my relationship like to my intuition? What's my relationship like with food and my body? And is there stress? Is there overwhelm? Is there behaviors that maybe are not serving you that you need to first maybe figure out and work through? And that's, I think, where people really get the benefit of nutrition education and information, because that like it's powerful when you understand it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And that's the thing. I really love that concept with regard to
Yes.
empowerment. Empowering yourself. And this is the thing. Actually, I had posted on my stories yesterday with regard to people who had come in to me on a journey with their cholesterol, and on a journey with their weight, and they're told certain things, and sometimes it breaks my heart hearing sometimes the stance or the approach that some healthcare professionals are
Yeah.
taking in how they speak to some of the patients that come and see
Yeah.
them. um and it's this, like, stepping onto the scales, this is the number, you need to go and lose weight, or the pain in your knees isn't going to go away. And it's kind of like, well, what about the layers of emotional and mental processing that are linked in with this? What about the energy of trauma that's trapped in the body with all of
Yes.
this stuff? Is there any discussion about nervous system regulation? It's almost like that there's a shame projected onto that person. They go away feeling so deflated in just a short 10-minute appointment.
Oh, yeah.
And even with some of the ladies that came into me, we're doing some follow-ups with cholesterol, and they were told that there was nothing they could do, get onto a statin, it was familial. And I am just seeing such amazing results by actually just allowing people the space to just talk about their journey with stuff. So if you're on this path and you're listening in, finding someone you can speak openly about some of this wounding that you've experienced, maybe some of the trauma or the emotion that's been linked to kind of food or behaviors you feel shame around. It can be so healing just telling your
Oh
tale.
my God. Oh, 100%. We all have a story. It needs to be heard. We
Yes.
all need to hear our own story, right? Because so many of us would have just pushed it down or put it in the closet and shut that door. But I think that in terms of the healthcare professionals, that's something that I see all the time. And I think that because our doctors, and again, like I work in the system, I know great
Mm.
doctors, nurses, etc. I'm not here to say that paint everybody with the one brush, but there is, because there's amazing healthcare professionals, but also the medical training is very weight centric, and there needs to be more education around weight stigma, weight discrimination, the impact that can have on our physical health is huge. um And I suppose the way people are being spoken to is just terrible. Just get in, stand the scale, you need to go and lose weight. As if that's something that weight is not a behavior. You can't walk out the door and decide, I'm going to lose weight. Like, it's not something you can practically do that day. It's not like going drinking water to rehydrate. Like, it's so complex. Whereas when you look at what are the behaviors, what are the action steps we could give you here, whether that is going to talk to somebody about what might be going on, whether that looks like maybe how might we increase your movement, how might we improve your sleep here, that could really support the situation. So people are so deflated, and there's so much shame around body weight, and particularly for people living in bigger bodies can often have such shame. They don't go to the doctor, they stay away from the doctor, because when they do go, they get told that their body weight is to blame. And then if their body weight increases, then they definitely won't go back to the doctor. So then their health outcomes tend to be poorer. Is it because they're not going to get the healthcare that they need, or because how they're being shamed and the impact that shame can have energetically and how that can manifest physically? So it's so complex. We cannot shame ourselves into positive behavior change. We've got to give ourselves the compassion, the kindness that we deserve. And unfortunately, that's not always what we receive when we go into the healthcare setting. And as you rightly mentioned, and again, we can't expect our doctors to be all things to all people and be trauma informed and nervous system informed. But I think they are big areas that are not considered in our health, system. And I think it's massive. It is massive. There needs to be better understanding about the role our nervous system plays and about trauma on physical, emotional, and mental well-being. That's a lot of the bulk of the work that we do with our clients. Is
Yes.
exactly on those areas. So yeah, really, it's
Oh,
will we ever get
yes.
there? I
You're
want to
speaking
remain
my
hopeful, but
language.
God.
You are literally speaking my language. And it's wild because obviously I got into medicine because I just think the human body is so fascinating. And, most of us uh, go through the system because we want to help, you know? But it is very siloed in a lot of ways, and it is a sick care system. And I see a lot of doctors in practice now that come to see me. And it's just so fascinating because it's becoming so much more visible to me that there is an awakening within the healthcare structure, that it's actually like, this is a sick care system. Are we going to continue to keep just writing prescriptions for people, or are we actually going to be able to hold them in a space of prevention, of helping them work through mental and emotional trauma, energetic clearing within the body? How do we do these things to get to the point where actually we don't need to be stepping in with the prescription pad and prescribing 20 different medicines, and then holding people on this journey as they come back with the side effects of all of these things? That's not to say actually we don't have some great things that
Oh, of
have been
course.
developed now to
Yeah.
support people in that
Yeah.
space, but it's almost like, I have to tell you, like, the when we were going through medical school, there was, now I went through a very a medical school when I was training in Sheffield, that they were quite progressive with regard to the social structure and how it impacted health. They were very much into that.
Okay.
um and I was quite lucky because other medical schools
Yeah.
didn't have that. But still, in saying that, our exposure to nutrition and the impact that food can have, it is absolutely overlooked.
Is it
Like,
like
there's
one day?
people,
I've heard from
oh,
doctors that say they didn't
yeah.
even remember getting one day on nutrition, like in their whole training. Like, it's incredible.
It's mind blowing. It's
Yeah.
mind blowing. Like, I had to go off and do all of my own stuff
Yes.
post graduation. Now, I was quite into nutrition before I went into medicine anyway. And then that just kind of expanded because I became obsessed with the microbiome
Yes.
and its impact on health generally, And I think just empowering people to kind of even understand their bodies. And that's, we're developing men's and women's programs at the moment that look at physical body, that look at mental and emotional body, that look at your energetic body. And that's what we did with the good course, is to essentially bring people on a journey of all aspects of who we are, because so many of those things, and even really a full understanding of how nutrition impacts the physical body, that was completely overlooked in medicine.
Yeah.
And I see transformative stories of people coming through the door, people who go on a journey to empower themselves to. And I find this is the case. Sometimes when you go in and you speak to someone, we don't necessarily have the education behind us to be speaking into some of these things, you
Mhm.
know? And people do get quite frustrated with the healthcare system and with their GPs and things like that. But uh, trying to oversee all of these things and to know everything, it's just
Oh, it's
impossible. You
impossible, and
can't,
yeah,
you
and I
know?
say that all the time, because like it would be look at like our doctors, and maybe in particular, like are kind of when we look at our health, look at the training doctors have to go through. There could be arguments that
Mm,
could you not argue that what they go through for so many years is not healthy. Like I've worked with
mm,
doctors that were so sleep deprived, the long shifts, the kind of on call for 3 nights and whatever else it is while studying. Like, in fairness, I do see what doctors go through in their training in particular. And, like, you couldn't say that actually it reflects kind of like how, like supporting somebody to look after themselves from a health perspective. I
mm.
see doctors that will say, I haven't got time to eat. I go long shifts where they're living off cans of Coke and the bar of chocolate just to get through their 12, 24-hour shift. So yeah, the system also doesn't support the doctors, is what I'm saying. The training also doesn't
Yeah.
support the doctors. So yeah, it's the
Yeah.
system that's flawed, really, is what I would look
Yes.
at it. Yeah.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. Like, having gone through it and actually stepping into private practice is probably what saved me in a lot of ways, because I have the flexibility within my own space now that I can prioritize my needs rather than
That's
working
brilliant.
110 hours in a
Yeah.
week. And you don't have time to prepare any food or to eat well. And the canteens aren't open in the
Yeah.
hospitals. So you could end up, if you haven't got any food prepared because you're doing a 28-hour shift the day before, and you're going in knowing, actually, I'm just not going to be able to eat tonight. Sometimes there's no spaces to even rest.
Yeah.
And, I kind of find it fascinating that, like, how are people that are working in healthcare on that journey supposed to support other people in their health and their healing? It just blows my mind.
100%, because so my day job, I work as a clinical nurse specialist in the perinatal mental health team. And I honestly cannot tell you the amount of healthcare professionals, particularly doctors, women that I have met pregnant, that they just based on the system been so under resourced, so understaffed, that there's been women that like in the later stages of their pregnancy are expected to do these really incredible long shifts on their feet, not no access to any kind of rest breaks, not getting time to eat. They're literally coming in going, I'm so exhausted, and like their mental health, in terms of how anxious they begin to feel because they know that there's a baby coming and they've had no rest, they've no time to prepare into baby coming.
Mm,
It's shocking. It's not good
yeah.
enough. It really isn't. Like, we've had to nearly force the arm of like several doctors that we've worked with to say, it's okay to take some time off. Take some time
Mm.
off, look after you and baby. And I would say that to anybody that's working in an incredibly demanding job. And when you're like a few weeks out from having a baby, you can't be doing 28-hour shifts and not eating and not putting your feet up. It's not safe.
Yes. Oh my God. Absolutely. And like, I love that you kind of, oh, I find it so fascinating that you have been on a journey with regard to kind of looking at what food looks like intuitively, working with your body, working through kind of mental and emotional processing, working through trauma. And I was reading on your Instagram that you worked in that perinatal mental health
Yeah.
space, and also you'd done some qualifications through UCD with the mindfulness based
Yeah.
training. So I love how you've tied it all together. So can you give some of our listeners just some tips and tricks, I suppose, maybe within the each of the different kind of spaces you work in, about what can people do today to begin to go on a journey with intuitive eating, and even just some steps with regard to mental and emotional well-being around food.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, even though because you mentioned UCD, so I finished my master's in mindfulness based interventions this year, and what brought me to do that training was that I am I am, what would I say? Who am I? Good question. But no,
Love it.
I am
Yes.
somebody that I would fill all of my day. I'm very kind of task orientated, goal orientated, productive. I love being busy. But I also knew on some level that it was a constant kind of distraction from being with something. Wasn't even really sure what exactly that something was, because I'm really lucky in life. I've a great family. I love my job. I'm very blessed. I have a great marriage and kids, and I couldn't, like, literally, life is good, and I'm very lucky to say that. But I knew that I was just constantly running, and that it wasn't good for my system. I knew that I was talking the talk about, emotion regulation and nervous system regulation, and I've been working this field for years. But on some level, I knew I wasn't really practicing it. There was something that was niggling at me to say, Sinead, if you don't learn how to have some spaciousness, rest, to be able to be still for any point of your life, you're going to miss things. You're going to miss the extraordinary, right? So that's why a couple of years ago I got more into meditation. I got more into visualization practices. And that's kind of what brought me to study mindfulness in UCD. So that really kind of cemented my own kind of formal practice. And it has been really game changing. And like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, saying that like it's so easy for me now. It's not. I have to work really hard. I have to be really conscious with my practice. I have to consciously choose to practice on a daily basis, to take time to meditate, to do the things that maybe serve me, like journal. I kind of love to go down to the lake in the morning, and I do my visualization practice in the lake, just by the lake in the morning before my day starts. They're the things that keep my system well. They're the things that remind my body, okay, I'm safe. It's okay to continue with some of the other, because my life is busy, and I love busyness because I thrive in busyness in many ways, but I also know it can come at a cost. And if you're not careful, you can very quickly move into burnout. And I've been close there a couple of times. Maybe studying and different things kind of brought me to the edge at times, and I knew that something was looming. So they would be the practices, I suppose, that have served me. And I think that, like, I would recommend for anybody, just download the free app Insight Timer. Like, Insight Timer has got amazing starting point. It's an amazing free resource. You can just choose to do 5 minutes. Even 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be, don't think you have to start out meditating for an hour. Like, some of my meditations could be 45 minutes or an hour, but I didn't start there, starting small. I suppose in terms of the other field that I work in, mental health, and working with women in that area, and been pregnant and postnatally, I suppose the one message that I would have for mammies in particular, it's okay to have needs. Do not forget that you have needs, and it's okay to have them. Yes, we obviously are responsible for looking after and rearing our smallie when we have them. Um, but it's also okay along the way, and maybe not so much in the real early stages, because when you have a newborn, it's very all like consuming, and you really don't have a minute. You're lucky if you get a shower. And I'm not talking about the self-care of like the bubble baths and going to the spa. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about even the day-to-day, the 5 minutes, the checking in, asking yourself, what might I need more of to feel supported? What what do I need to make me feel, more safe? And that might
Mm.
look like asking for maybe help. It might look like saying, I need to go up and just sit by myself in my room for 5 minutes where nobody calls my name. Whatever that might be, because I think what I see happening is that when we have children, and again, there's other factors, of course, that plays a role, because for some people they've loads of help, and for others they don't have as much help. They might be really actually parenting on their own. There could be single parents that have here listening that have got nobody, only themselves. That makes it really much more challenging to maybe
Mm.
access some of this time to kind of connect in and to ask, what is it that I might need? Um, and it's about working with whatever situation you're in. It's even if you can't meet those needs right now, it's still noting that they're there, and it's okay. I have a need for this, and it's okay. Because I think we as women in particular, we put so much focus into our children, and then sure, all of a sudden our children will leave. One day, hopefully, if we've done our job, they get to go and they get to live their own life. And we don't want to find ourselves in this place where we don't know who we are, and we don't know what we like, and
Yes.
we don't know what matters to us, and we don't know where our relationships and our friendships have gone. So that would
Yes.
be something that I think, again, it's about approaching that in a really gentle, compassionate way. Like, I'm not saying that we're going to be get to go out and go meet our friends every day of the week. And it's not like this isn't Sex in the City. We're not going to be out lunching and brunching it every day of the week. But it's the smaller things, it's getting the 10 minutes
Mm.
walk for yourself, or, getting to call your friend upstairs in your room for 10 minutes to connect in with a friend, like whatever that might look like. Yeah, so you've got needs is my message. And it's okay to have needs.
Yes. Well, oh my God, I love that. And I love pregnancy. Obviously, I do a lot of work with fertility and
Yes.
pregnancy, and I volunteer at the National Maternity Hospital on Fridays,
Oh, wow, yeah.
with the women there, and I just absolutely love pregnancy, and the little babas. It just brings so much joy. But this is one thing that I tend to see in women in that kind of postnatal period. Um, is this kind of loss of sense of self, and especially those really hyper independent women that end up having a baby, and then it's like it's almost like their world comes crashing down around them, that they've kind of lost their sense of self because they were so independent previously, and then they really struggle to get out and about, even to just pack up the pram, get the bits and pieces together and actually leave the house. That's a huge undertaking for a new mum, you
Oh my
know.
God, massive. It really is.
Yeah.
And as you said, for some women in particular, yes, you're so right that, like, if you were very like you said, hyper independent, and maybe doing your own thing, and then what can happen is it can feel like there's all these expectations of what it's meant to look like, right? Meant to look like
Mhm.
that every day is just joyful, and we're going to be out strolling in the prom, and having the coffee and meeting the friends and go to the playground, and it's all wonderful. And actually, it's not maybe always like that. And I think the pressure
Yeah.
then on us then to kind of like what it's meant to look like, and that if it doesn't really match up like that all the time, it's like, well, what's wrong with me? Why haven't I appreciating, or why doesn't this look like how it looks for my friends? But I think we need to have more maybe open conversations about what it can look like. Yes, of course it can, hopefully be lots of moments of joy. But it's not like you might get 24 hours of joy. You might get moments of
Mhm.
joy throughout the day. And it's about recognizing that that's actually enough. That's okay. Because a lot of the other time, it might be very mundane, boring tasks. A lot of the time, it's just you maybe and a baby. You might feel sensations of loneliness maybe for your past
Mhm.
for what your life was like beforehand, and that's actually okay if we allow that to be there, and not bring the resistance in to kind of like have to make it look a certain way or have to feel a certain way. Then actually it will dissolve, it'll dissipate, and it's okay to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And like I love, and that's why I love having these discussions, and just creating a narrative for women to be able to hear that there's different ways of doing things, and that there's different versions of normal for everybody.
Yeah,
And I think even a lot of women that I meet with carry such immense guilt even around breastfeeding, and I see it just daily in my practice, because perhaps they found it really bloody hard, perhaps they weren't able to breastfeed,
yeah,
and the guilt and the shame that's come upon them as a byproduct of that as well, and it can really negatively impact their mental health
totally.
on that journey. So
Yeah,
there's so many facets of motherhood. I feel like we'll need to do a
yeah,
whole
sure.
other
We'll have to
podcast
do another
on
whole
this.
podcast
Yeah,
on breastfeeding, because I can tell you I've had some experiences with that. I can talk about that forever.
exactly. I know, and I think we need to create more of a narrative that's publicly visible with this. Because it's bloody hard.
Yeah,
I think being a new mother is bloody
yeah,
hard,
yeah,
and even just recovering from the trauma of delivery, it's bloody fucking hard.
yeah,
And energetically, uh, because I tend to say to people when I'm working with them quite close to term, like the energetic center, the sacral chakra that the womb governs, if we have wounding and trauma in that space, if we have wounding and trauma in the root chakra that hasn't been looked at, as that beautiful little pure soul, that lovely little energy begins to grow, it will shake up the vibrational energy that isn't in alignment with its pure beautiful light, which means that actually a lot of women through pregnancy, a lot of shit starts to come up for
Yeah.
them within those two energetic centers, purely as a byproduct of carrying this pure energy in the body.
Yeah. We see that all the time.
And
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
completely. And it's about holding women on that journey of actually, well, what's coming up for me during this? Like, because sometimes people go through an awakening of very deep shadow within
Yeah.
them,
Oh,
you
absolutely.
know?
Mm.
Yeah, and even the birth in and itself, the impact energetically on the cervix, on the body, the trauma that can awaken within
Yeah,
someone
for sure.
by going through the birthing process. So I love that we're kind of touching base with this. I absolutely think we need to record another episode on
For
this,
sure.
and I love that we've even gone here with this. And I hope some of the women listening can just feel seen and heard in some of
Yeah.
this, because I don't think it's talked about often
Yeah.
enough. Would you
Oh my
agree?
God, no, I don't. And again, it's not to say that anybody is doing it wrong when they
Mm,
share social media and what their postnatal experience is like. But we've got to remember that what we might see online is like a highlight. It's people don't want to, I suppose, be quote unquote negative. So instead, they'll share the lovely moments of joy in their day. But when you see those snippets of joy and you're like, well, my day wasn't so joyful, it's like the comparison trap we fall into. And then comes the self shaming and blaming and self criticism that we're not doing it right enough and all the rest of it. We're not good enough. So, yeah, again, it's just have awareness around that and
yeah,
just, yeah, discern, okay, like, if you find yourself comparing, if you find that message, that kind of narrative is there for you, the not good enough narrative, that's when I'd be like, do source some support for that, because actually there's a lot that can be done there. You can really work through that with somebody, and your experience postnatally, and this isn't even just postnatally, I'm talking about anybody. Your experience,
yes,
your
yeah,
life can be very different if you source a safe person, a safe space to navigate some of this with, and then ultimately find out you're not alone. And that actually what you're feeling is not wrong. There's a communication there. Your body is telling you something. So it's really about getting
yeah.
curious about what that message might be and then what you might do with that message.
Oh, Sinead. Like, I just love listening to the breadth of wisdom and knowledge that you have. It just spans so many different areas of our being. And even to be able to speak into kind of, I feel like you are such a gift uh, to particularly women, I feel, on this journey
Thank
uh, across the spectrum of life,
Oh, thank you.
of what
That's
it's like
lovely
to
to hear.
kind of grow up and to go on a journey of mothering through the birth process, and then actually how do you hold your children as they grow up as well. So thank you so much for coming on to
Thank
talk
you
to me
so much
today. I
for having
feel like
me.
this is only the start of a journey. We have to chat more.
Oh, we sure will. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, and just before we finish up, is there any way that people can get in touch with you? What's the best way to work with you?
Yeah,
In
great.
what capacity do you
So
work?
I'm on Instagram, intuitive.eating.ireland, and then our website is www.intuitiveeatinghub.com. So yeah, so we do like low cost memberships, monthly memberships. We only run our main course 3 times a year, so that's not opening again until January. So that's a wonderful course. It's quite intense, but if people are ready to dive into their eating issues, their emotional eating, whatever it might be, and they want to have a more peaceful relationship with food, that will be opening up again in January. Yeah.
Oh, amazing, amazing. And for those listening as well, please touch base with Sinead and I on Instagram.
Yes.
And also, we have released our course with regard to gut health as well to bring people on a very holistic journey. And we'll put the link in the show notes for all of these resources. So there is resources out there to help you and support you in a very holistic way. And hopefully, Sinead and I have been able to just highlight the need to look beyond kind of food and into that space with regard to your mind, your emotion, the trauma, and the energy on this journey of optimum well-being. And Sinead, again, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully I'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Take care.